So our next guest speaker is Anthony Hewett. Anthony is Chief Geologist with Heathgate Resources. He's worked as a uranium geologist for the past 16 years, starting as a uranium exploration geologist throughout South Australia and the Northern Territory with Heathgate. He's moved to production geology at the Beverley mine site and currently oversees the Geology Department's exploration activities and production geology. He spent many days in the field with Stephen Neville, discussing the Frome embayment sediment histories, which of course are presented here in Bulletin 57. So Anthony, if you could talk about changing models, how research findings have fired up exploration in the Curnamona and in the cover. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Reg. And thanks very much to the GSSA and Stephen Neville for inviting me to talk today, just to provide a bit of a company perspective. As Reg said, I met Steve and Neil at a dusty station called Moolawatna in the very northern part of the Flinders Ranges. They were doing some work on this bulletin, part of the larger study, and I was up there just doing some drilling. I hadn't met Neville before, and we had some great conversations around what I was up to in the area. Particularly, he was fascinated with the fact that he got to walk around the rocks all day, but I was actually drilling the things that he actually wanted to see in the basin. And what I want to talk today is a bit about that collaboration whereby companies like Heathgate, we have a data set that the GSSA don't get to see by just walking around. We have to provide that data through our drill logs and our interpretations. And I just wanted to highlight the importance as well as the world moves to new technologies and AI and machine learning that, as Paul said, that there's a place today for these types of studies. So just a bit of a background on Heathgate for those that aren't quite aware. We're located in the Frome Basin, just the northern part of the Flinders Ranges, and we have a uranium mine there. The company started producing in about 2001 in a deposit called Beverley. Now this Beverley deposit is in tertiary sediments in the Namba Formation, and we mined that for quite a few years and then moved on to Air Formation, which some in the room might know, also hosts the Honeymoon deposit. And more excitingly, in 2005 we found a deposit called 4 Mile West. Now the reason I bring that up is this 4 Mile West deposit is actually hosted in the very Cretaceous glacial sediments that we're talking about in Bulletin 57. The majority of our exploration ground, you can see in the blue tenements on the right-hand side, actually covers a lot of the study area for Bulletin 57. And what we've got superimposed is Neville and Steve's Cretaceous glacial extents that they're interpreting. So you can see that we actually have quite a coverage for the ground that we currently explore on. And I also wanted to come here just to say that the positive impact that Neville and Steve's study has had on Heathgate as well. It does get people very excited and fired up when people come and look at our grounds and bring new eyes to it and new interpretations. Just personally as well, I enjoyed Jane, your talk just before. I'm a Monash University student, and I actually did a lot of the dinosaur digs down in Victoria and got into the Cretaceous headspace. Little did I know that I'd actually be working again on the Cretaceous with Heathgate Resources. So just a little bit of a background on our geology. On the very right-hand side there, I've just got a bit of a very basic strat log showing that we do have uranium throughout a lot of the sequences of the Frome Basin. Like I mentioned, starting in the Miocene Namba Formation with our Beverley deposit, moving through the Air Formation, and then within the Cretaceous Bulldog Shale, and what we have a localised unit called the 4 Mile dimictite, which is early in Aptian age, similar age to the Bulldog Shale, and actually gradationally fines into the Bulldog Shale. And then underneath that, we actually have uranium sitting underneath us. We are in a very well endowed part of the world in the Flinders Ranges there, and on the bottom image you can just see a radiometric image there with the Mount G and Mount Painter uranium clearances really standing out, where you're getting up to 60 ppm uranium at the surface. And again, superimposed on that is the interpretation of those glacial paths during the Cretaceous. In the middle track there, I've just got two examples of some of the core that we get at 4 Mile West. So the left-hand one there is our 4 Mile West dimictite, and it might be a little bit hard to see here, but we do have some drop stones throughout. So back in 2005, when the deposit was first discovered, we were unsure whether it was air formation or what it was. We did some work and then could find some of these drop stones in our core, and we're like, oh, looks glacial, that's pretty good. We better put away for some palynology, and it came back at Cretaceous, and we were really, really, really surprised, actually. The model within the company was, well, this is just a freak of nature. It's sitting in a tiny little basin next to the Flinders Ranges. We're never going to see this again. And, with Neville and Steve's work, we actually found out that there's a lot of Cretaceous sediments that have glacial features right around. And that's interesting to us because this glacial host here, the formyl dimictite, is actually a perfect trap for our uranium. So it has all the ingredients we need to stop uranium in its tracks. So a bit of a history, I don't want to get too technical, but uranium, when it becomes oxidised, becomes mobile and can move through aquifers. As soon as it reaches a reduced zone or has a sufficient chemistry, it'll precipitate and then just form on the sand grains and just form these lovely roll fronts where you're getting a groundwater movement, in this instance left to right. So we have oxidised fluids coming in here, reaching a point at which it precipitates in the ground, and that's what we mine. We mine this roll front. Now the dimictite itself is a perfect host for high-grade uranium deposits. Its permeability and porosity isn't too high, so it's a bit of a Goldilocks. We don't want really high permeabilities and porosities because the uranium can wash through really quickly. It can't spend time precipitating and do what we need. Being glacial in origin, and as we saw with Janestalk, there was a lot of vegetation at the time in this area, and we do find small amounts of lignitic material, all your leaves and wood, finely ground up nicely by the glaciers for us. And over time, little bacteria in the formation have then eaten away at that and then formed iron sulfides in there, some pyrites. So we have our reductant. So what we're getting effectively is uranium being oxidised off the ranges or coming through faults right along that range front there, moving out into the basin, and it's hitting these reducing traps. And our dimictite is perfect. It has everything we want, and it allows the accumulation of a large amount of uranium. Hence, Four West is probably one of the largest uranium deposits, sedimentary hosted uranium deposits in the world. And just in the bottom right there, I've just got a little diagram stolen from Neville showing what part of the sequence we're talking about there. So we're out, we're getting little icebergs coming out over the top of our sediments and dropping some stones in, and we can see those in the core. On the right-hand side of the log there, the drill core, we've just got some tillite. So we also find these glacial tills as well sitting directly underneath. And these really do stand out. It always confuses our geologists when we hit them just in our mud rotary, which is a crushing of the rock drill method, whereby the chips you get up are just so polymictic and they're from everywhere that everyone scratches their head and gets confused and goes, I don't know where I am, it's supposed to be hard rock, etc., etc. So just in terms of the collaboration, the journey between the GSSA and Neville and Steve really started back in the mid-2000s with Steve Hill, who's here today, and the University of Adelaide. So a group of honours students and PhD students were taken around just behind the Four West area to have a look at regolith and understand what's going on. Through those first studies, I think a lot of ground was covered where a lot of questions were raised, like what are we actually looking at here? This was supposed to be all really recent, shed off the ranges, but maybe we actually have preserved glacial terrains even in these sediments here. And subsequent to that, there's been a lot of papers, I think, through Adelaide University that is starting to discuss that glacial story. Neville and Steve have also been kind enough to give their expertise to our geology group as well. Back in 2018, they took us through the Flinders Ranges, so starting at Arkaroola, and actually followed the journey of a glacier effectively. So starting around the Mount G, Mount Painter area, and showed us the terrains of all these preserved glacial sediments through the Flinders Ranges, and then those glacial remains were then coming out into our basin, and we could go from the direct source where the glaciers are grinding up the rocks through the glacial avenues, and then having a look at some of our drill core and going, look, we can see what's happening in the hills, we can see on the edge of the basin, and now we can see it in the core itself. So that was a great experience for our geologists to be able to actually walk on rocks. All all our geology effectively is coming up from little mud chips, a little bit of core if we're lucky, and from downhole wireline logs. So it just would generate the excitement and got people thinking a lot. On top of that, I've just got a picture there of a drill program at Mount Urilla. So this is when I first met Neville back in 2015, and it was quite fortuitous. We didn't know Steve and Neville were going to be up there. And we were able to provide some of our drill cuttings. So this is further out into the basin, drilling through some of the Kadanawi Cretaceous sediments there, which would allow some of the age dating and see the thicknesses of the units actually heading out away from the ranges rather than right at the very edge when they were mainly focusing. So just on the importance of the Bulletin and studies like this, from a company perspective, studies like this that really go into depth in the interpretation space and really take the time to make sure you're producing a good product and a good interpretation. Companies don't have that time or resources to be able to do that. We're very short-natured, unfortunately. We're looking at 6 months time frames for a lot of our exploration programs. We need to get in, get out, get an understanding and make a decision quickly. What also this bulletin allows is like a level of objectivity and impartiality. So often with company reports, they've got a certain angle that they're trying to push, a certain commodity they might be trying to look for, and so everything will be tailored just for that report to say yes, my gold is here, or no, it's not here. What something like the Bulletin provides is a really nice geological interpretation, analysis that has no bias. People can pick it up and go, there's no motive here except for good science. It's also a fantastic example of how experts in their field can get together and produce a really superior product. Steve started off hard rock. He was walking around the Flinders Ranges and kicking over rocks, then coupling up with Neville, being able to see some of those rocks in sediments and go, well, I've seen that, but that's like kilometres away over there. What's going on there? Without the expertise of both of them to be able to describe the transport mechanisms and the provenance of some of these, this report, would have taken a lot longer or not happened at all, I think. The output of this bulletin also provides a framework for regional exploration models. So from our point of view, we have our tenements, we have our exploration space, and we have data for those tenements. And if we're lucky, historical data sets. What the bulletin also provides is the regional explanation of how everything ties in together. So we can start to look at new areas for prospectivity. We can start discussing with the group, well, maybe if glaciers have pushed sediments this way and that way, maybe we should pick up ground over there, or we'll watch this tenement and see if someone decides to drop the ground. It opens up the minds of our geologists and myself and everyone else. Like they can flick through something physical in their hands. We do a lot of research these days, as everyone does on computer screens, and I think you sometimes lose something by just reading on a screen. You're often flicking very quick through things. You're not taking the time to mull over. You're not sitting in bed at night with this on your lap. And as everyone knows, Bulletin 54 from many years ago, the Green Book, is a fantastic resource. I've got one in my office. I still go back to it every day, or every few days, every few weeks, just trying to understand South Australia as a whole. And I'm hoping that Bulletin 57 has a similar place in people's hearts as well. As Paul said before, fieldwork is irreplaceable. There are so many advances at the moment in the geophysics space, the remote surveys, AI and machine learning, and everyone wants to get out there and find the next best thing. Talking to Steve Hill just before, he raises the point that it's a really interesting conundrum that people just want to be fast and find out answers, but they're not actually assessing at the data set which everything's based on. And the only way you can get really good data sets is by spending, half of your life out on the rocks and come out with stories and going over things, changing your hypothesis, changing everything when you see a new rock, and then coming up with an idea of how it all starts to fit in together. That forms a backbone then to be able to go on and do these new fancy methods. Neville and Steve, thank you very much for taking the time out in the field, getting the vitamin D to be able to come up with fantastic pictures and everything, you know, all the analysis. So value for Heathgate, I guess, like I said, you know, the stratigraphic dating and correlation through the entire Frome Basin and what the area we call the Western Flinders, out towards Lyndhurst and further north, Mumpiawi. You know, without their work, we are scratching our heads sometimes. You know, we can send away for palynology on some drill cuttings if we're lucky. You know, drill cuttings and palynology only really work if the sample medium's in a reduced form. When it's oxidised, often the palynology gets destroyed. And funnily enough, we're looking for the oxidised stuff really. You know, to be able to have a guide on the dating and correlation is you know, indispensable. And it gets us thinking on landform change over time. As previously said, the Flinders Ranges is a very active part of the world. It's always changing. From a uranium perspective, what we're looking for is a bit like in the oil and gas game, whereby we're looking for a source. So we've got our Flinders Ranges, we've got our Mount G, Mount Painter uranium there, but we're also looking for a transport and a trap, and those things are just as equally important as having a source. So transport-wise, this is where the landform change over time is incredibly important for us. It tells us about where those groundwaters might have gone over the last 100 million years and how they might have been moving uranium around the system. You can't think of it as just it's gone from point A to point B. It might have gone to point A, B, C, D, D, and it just kept going around in a bit of a washing machine. As soon as it's oxidised, it's mobile again. It can always keep moving. And then, again, looking at the traps. So we have beautiful reductants in our glacial sediments because of those lignitic materials and the plant vegetation. Like I mentioned previously, Heathgate's got a lot of value out of prospectivity. You'll notice on the left-hand side there's an extra set of tenements here. Those primarily came about through Stephen Neville's work, where we're looking at the glaciers, whereabouts those glaciers might actually be coming from. Were they feeding a source into the Western Flinders, which had sort of been neglected in the past? Idea generation, you know, looking at this work, looking at the new correlations that are coming forward. We're always refining our search for uranium. I've just got in the bottom down here just one model we had from quite a few years ago, whereby we're thinking about uranium being shed off through the glaciers from the Mount G Painter area, coming through, coupling that with our geophysics in the AEM space and the gravity space, finding troughs that that material could have flown into, and then going and exploring that area, which was, you know, a really good exercise for our geologists to go from something academic right the way through to drill results. And then again, collaboration. You know, it's always great having strong ties to the GSSA, exposing our geologists to people at the GSSA, and getting exposure to new ideas and new expertise. So Neville, Steve, thank you very much. Enjoy today.